Anybody have any questions? Comments about the class? Everything's making sense. We're doing well and progressing along towards the end. And I'm sorry if I'm rushing the semester. I promised myself I wouldn't do that, but this year needs to go. So, all right, well, let's have a look. And I do want to say this, and I'll hopefully say it again. There is no class on Wednesday, right? Holiday. I probably should look at the Palomar schedule to ensure that that's true, but it should be. Okay. Let's share the screen. Have a look at what's going on. All right. We are in week 12. Today is November 9th. And I am your host, Robert Walker. Let's talk about critique. How we analyze, interpret, and understand movies, their stories, techniques, and their place in society. And how we analyze, how we evaluate, and how we interpret movies, how they work within our culture, within our society, within history, and anything else that we want to bring into the discussion. This is what we do after every movie when we watch it with our friends and we talk about it. And then when you start talking about it, you're critiquing it. A lot of times we talk about the story, the plot, the acting, the ending, and what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it. That's all critiquing. Something that everybody does because everyone's a critic, right?
Everybody's a critic.
Right, exactly. We see a piece of art, we see a movie, a TV show, we critique it, we evaluate it. We look into the professional world of movie watching. Basically, the three types of critics: your reviewers, which generally the local journalists who just describe the contents and general tone of the movie and maybe recommend it or not recommend it, but generally just give us a summary of what it is. Critics will tend to emphasize evaluation rather than mere content, give us an idea what it is, and then talk about if it's good or bad and why they think it's good or bad. And then film theorists, usually professional academics, write books and journals and articles, and they're concerned with how a movie works. And film theorists will also talk about a whole lot of other things that we'll talk about in a few minutes. They can evaluate a movie in any type of way possible. They might talk about psychology or its historical relevance, or how it's a microcosm of our society or a certain culture or something. They can analyze a movie in any way possible. All right. This is something that I feel a good critic or a good critique should do. I got this from the book and then I tweaked it just a little bit. I think movies should help people see what is in the work and decide if they're going to like it. I'm not a fan of when people say, whether they're a professional critic or just a friend, they just say a movie sucks. If a script gets from script to your television or to the theaters, there's something in it 99% of the time that makes it worthwhile. Now, there is a movie called The Stupids with Tom Arnold. and I couldn't find anything redeeming about it. But didn't give it a chance because twice I tried to start it, and within 10 minutes I had to turn it off because it was so bad. But there's something in that made it get produced. It was directed by John Landis, who directed Animal House and American Werewolf in London and Michael Jackson's Thriller, but I still couldn't watch it. But somebody might watch it and think it's good. I don't know. But still, like I said, I don't want to pan anything that's gone through, especially those types of talents. And who knows, something about it. First of all, another thing is what I may love, someone else may hate, and what I may hate, someone else might love. So it's more important, in my opinion, to help people see what's in the work and decide if they should watch it. When I worked in a video store, when I was just out of high school, and people would ask me, is this movie any good? And I would try to make a comparison between that movie and another movie that came before it that person may have seen and said, well, if you like this or this type of movie, you'll like it. You know, you're gonna like Friday the 13th Part 6. Well, did you like any of the first ones? That type of thing. Compare it to a similar movie and then recommend or not recommend based on that. Because it's not really important if I liked it as much as if this person would like it. If we're totally different target audiences, me being at that time a teenager, I'm not gonna have the same likes as some middle-aged person that comes in potentially. Another thing critics should do is try to explain what is good about the movie and what it lacks, or what is bad, what is not that strong about the movie. It's got great action sequences. The plot line is interesting, but the characters are flat, or something like that. There's not enough character development to really get invested in them for me. That type of critiquing. Help people understand more about the movie than they would get out of it themselves. Meaning, talk about things that you might not catch the first time you watch it. Talk about things that are a little less obvious that come up as more you think about it. Maybe talk about it in relevance to what is happening in our culture or what was happening at the time in the culture that the movie takes place in. Things like that. Give them a little perspective about the movie. Talk about things in the movie that are revolutionary, potentially. Inspire people to experience and know more about the art, transmit knowledge and enthusiasm for the art. So be inspirational, bring in that enthusiasm for how good movies can be and how they can help us, and not just get us to kill 2 hours of time, but how we can learn from them, how we can be moved by them, how we can grow as people. I talk about characters arcing in movies. That brings a human experience to that movie. It's also a message to us if we're guilty of a similar flaw in our character. Maybe that's something we can be inspired to work on. I'm going to go back to the third one here. It's also fun for critics or audiences to hear critics talk about maybe some sort of production aspect that they wouldn't have known about the movie, something that makes it more interesting. For example, they shot Back to the Future for 1 week with Eric Stoltz playing Marty McFly, and it didn't work. They had been trying to get Michael J. Fox to do that movie. Michael J. Fox was in the middle of Family Ties, a sitcom that had a very, very busy production schedule. And they came out of the first week and looked at what they had. This is not working. We need Michael J. Fox. They went back to Michael J. Fox. And he said, all right, I don't need to sleep. I'm in my 20s. And they shot most of that movie at night around his Family Ties commitments. And other things might be important or interesting that make the audience, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. It makes the movie might be more entertaining then. So help people see what's in the work to decide if they're going to like it. Explain what is strong and what is weak in the movie, what's good, what's not so good. Help people understand more about the movie than they might get out of it themselves, and inspire people to know more about the art and to enjoy the art more. Any questions, comments? Film theorists, especially in the olden days, create terminology, talk about the social, political implications of a movie, make artistic comparisons to other movies or even other books or even other forms of art. Its historical relevance. How does that fit in with the society of the time? Cultural relevance. Similar thing, but a little more localized. Technological perspective, did they do anything groundbreaking? Is it 3D? Is it a lot of CGI? Did they take someone's face from acting in a studio and put it on them, put it on some stunt double? Things like that. It's economic success and it's critical success. Lots of movies will have more critical success than economic success. And lots of movies will have more economic success than critical success. Those summer blockbusters are usually don't do that well with the critics, but the audiences may flock to them and vice versa. So those are all ways that theorists can analyze movies. Any comments or questions?
I recall like an old like critique when it came to like theorists and people trying to analyze everything, that there's a point where they can actually become overzealous, or to the point where literally they're thinking up the story before it's even meant to be written, or they tend to spoil things before it's actually meant to be revealed.
Yeah, and film theorists can definitely do that. And you don't necessarily want to read a film theorist breakdown of a movie without seeing it first, because they're not really trying to get you to go see it. They're trying to analyze it for everything it has in it. And I agree very strongly agree that sometimes we can overanalyze things, where they can say, oh, this means this and this means that. And the director and the writer and the actor is like, really, it does? I had no idea. I didn't mean to put that in there. Good for me. Potentially. So then, and I think that happens when we analyze art. And sometimes the creators of the art might say, yeah, that must have been a subconscious thing I did, or I really wanted to do that, or wow, I totally disagree with you. I don't think that's what it's not what I intended, and I didn't mean for that, and I hope no one gets that out of it. Potentially. I'm not saying film theorists are wrong, but I do believe there's there's a line that some people will cross when they start analyzing things a little too deeply. But it can be a lot of fun, and it can be interesting, and there are things that can come out of it that nobody ever thought of before that do fit. And that's a great point to bring up. Citizen Kane is one of the most critically successful movies of all time. It wasn't that financially successful. Part of that was maybe, in my opinion, it's not the most entertaining movie. Star Wars is way more entertaining. Well, it has a lot of flaws. Citizen Kane doesn't seem to have any flaws, but for me, it's not as entertaining of a movie. And both of those movies I've seen dozens of times. Part of the economic success of Citizen Kane was hampered because he was basically taking a shot at William Randolph Hearst of Hearst Castle. If you've ever gone up to Cambria in California on the coast and gone to Hearst Castle, as he made a lot of money in media and newspapers, and he's Orson Welles was kind of making fun of him with his Citizen Kane character. Well, William Randolph Hearst owned a lot of theaters, and they were not allowed to show Citizen Kane. So that took away a lot of potential profits for the movie. But even then, I don't know that it would have been as economically successful as other movies of its time. You know, Wizard of Oz may have still outperformed at the theaters. If you're going to take your kids to see Wizard of Oz, you're probably not going to take your kids to see Citizen Kane. Maybe, I don't know. Depends on your children, I guess. Any other comments? Okay. We've talked about the auteur theory, the theory that the director is the dominant artist in a movie. When producing a movie, it takes many, many artists working very hard. And I mentioned that when you write it and direct it, then really you're the auteur. So here are a couple exceptions to the auteur theory. There are some not very good movies made by directors who have made great movies. Not everything Francis Ford Coppola did was great. And there's certainly other directors who generally turn out great stuff that don't. I mentioned The Stupids. John Landis directed that, and it's not great. If you're into that, I should talk to a kid in our other class who loves watching really bad movies for the sake of watching bad movies. I should get him to watch The Stupids, and he can tell me how great, how terribly great it is. Other things, great movies made by average directors. Casablanca is still considered critically one of the greatest movies of all time. It will never leave the AFI's top 100 list and probably stay in the top 10. I'm not sure where it lies, but I think it is in the top 10. It was directed by Michael Critique, who directed a lot of movies, and none of them were considered all that great. He was a competent director who did well, but in Casablanca, everything came together in perfect harmony. It's still considered one of the greatest movies of all time by a director who's not considered one of the greatest directors of all time. Another potential exception, I'm not saying that this actually happened. I'm saying there was a potential for Reese Witherspoon in Legally Blonde 2 to have more creative input than the director because she was the producer and therefore hired the director. She was in just about every scene as the lead actor, which also means she's putting her stamp right there on the movie and could talk to the director and say, let's do it this way. I don't know that that happened. I'm assuming that she hired a director that she had the utmost confidence in and let them do their job. But potentially she could have had a greater influence than the director. And that happens in some things where actors have more clout or more credibility or power than a director. Bonnie and Clyde from 1970 or 1960s. The director argued with Warren Beatty every day, it seemed like. I just remember seeing something about it where they talked about they would sit there and have arguments for like an hour or more. And the whole crew and cast are standing there going, what do we do? While they figured it out. The movie turned out great. It's a very fun movie. And so I don't know who had the final word in those scenes, but there certainly was some headbutting between the star of the film and the director of the film. Any comments, questions?
It's kind of like the whole, like some of these, sometimes it's like they hit like really good like strides with their movies and they hit really bad and then they kind of like flop here and there.
Yeah, it happens.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah, and not everything we do well, even when we've done it well many times. And with a movie, we talk about the X factor. We talk about that with sports and athletes. We talk about it with just about anything that can't be completely figured out analytically. And what's the X factor of the movie? Why does it click with audiences and is hugely successful versus a movie that might be just as good that doesn't work? Alec Baldwin played the Shadow in 1992, the old radio program Only the Shadow Knows, and they tried to bring that character to life, and they did everything right, but it just didn't work. It just fell flat. And like I said, they did. I think the script was strong, the production design was strong, the directing was strong, the acting was strong, and nobody cared. And that just happens, and then you have a movie like Star Wars captures the imagination of children and adults alike, and turns into the biggest franchise in the world.
I always like the story, the fact that in order to get the movie actually out into actual theaters, George George Lucas actually had to make a deal with Fox, and Fox News, of course, said sure, we can do it. But one of the things that George says that he would get licensing control, and Fox would get some of the money. Well, Fox thought that the movie was going to be a flop anyways, or didn't really have any trust in it. So they said, sure, we'll give you license control and whatever the heck it makes. So when the movie comes out and it's an absolute success, Fox only walks away with only about 5 to 10% of the whole money that the movie grossed.
Wow. Yeah, and he shopped it around. He only got $2 million to budget, which in 1976 was a lot more money than it is now. But gosh, there's music videos in the 90s that probably had budgets over 2 million. I don't know what Thriller's budget was, but it's probably up there. You know, and it just it's an X Factor. It's like, I don't know, it worked. It captured everyone's imagination. Certainly the storyline, the characters are wonderful, and the universe he created is just so amazing for us to to think about and throw ourselves into the, either Han Solo's shoes or Luke Skywalker's shoes or Princess Leia's shoes, and identify with those characters. It just works. There's certain actors that have X factor. I think Matt Damon is a fine actor, and I think Mark Wahlberg is a fine actor. I think Mark Wahlberg is more fun to watch. I don't know that I wouldn't say he's a better actor. I just prefer he's more fun to watch. He has the X factor, the charisma, and not that Matt Damon doesn't have charisma. And that's just a comparison. And someone else might feel the opposite, which is fine. And they always talk about the X factor, and I think it applies not just to actors; it applies to movies. It applies to sports and athletes and other things, and probably just in everyday life. I remember Mr. Photogenic from a couple of years ago in a marathon. There's this picture that started to go viral because there's all these runners running, and then this guy just pops out of the middle of the picture. He just has the camera just caught him perfectly, and it's like, oh my God, that guy's so handsome. Your eyes just drawn to it. It becomes the the main thing that your eye is drawn to. I mean, who knows why? They used to do that. Producers are known back in the day, the golden era or whenever. They just pull something. They see a person on the street and say, "Oh, come in for a screen test." You just have this look that's engaging, and bring them in for a screen test and see if they could act. And some stars were made that way. I mean, what the heck is photogenic? Some people look better in pictures than they do in real life. Then there's the regular people who don't necessarily look better in pictures. And every now and then we catch ourselves in a good picture. Like, oh, I'm keeping that picture. That's going on my Facebook or whatever. Okay. Any other comments? Let's look at our discussion board. This is your final discussion board. Yay. I'm going to have you be a critic, a radio or television personality who critiques movies professionally. And Roman remembers that. Mr. Photogenic or whatever they called him. My computer just made a noise I've never heard in my life. Interesting. Okay, so pick a movie you're familiar with. Maybe you should watch it again. What I want you to do is write a 90-second critique. I mean, pretend you're a critic who does a critique for movies, either on a radio show or on a TV show. So when I say 90 seconds, you should be able to read it out loud in 90 seconds. So it shouldn't be that long, but it shouldn't be that short either. Okay. So once you've written it, set your timer on your watch or your phone and read it out loud as if you're performing it, and see if, as long as it's close to 90 seconds, you're fine. But if it's 3 minutes, it's not fine. If it's 15 seconds, that's not fine. Okay. Make sure you touch on the 4 things that we talked about. Excuse me, sorry about that. And make sure they're included in your critique. Help people see what's in the work and decide if they like it. Try to explain what's good about the movie, what's bad about the movie. Help people understand more about the movie. If you can find out an interesting little anecdote, a little fact about it, or something that occurred to you that you think is interesting, include that. And breathe in your inspiration so the audience feels inspired to know more about the art, and transmit your knowledge and enthusiasm for the art. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good critique. You can say why you think a movie is not that good. Keep your summary of the movie very brief. Include the actors, the main actors, which you probably do in your first sentence. So in this movie starring so and so and so and so as these types of characters. You don't want to do any spoilers. Don't spoil the big twist. Don't tell us the big surprise ending of The Sixth Sense, despite the fact that I think everyone probably knows it. But I won't say it in case you don't, because it does ruin the whole movie. So keep the summary brief and short. Don't spoil anything. Tell us who's in the movie, and then what it's good, why, what about it's good, what it could be better, or what you think is a little weak. Help people see what's in the work and decide if they like it. You know, horror movies aren't for everybody. Romantic comedies aren't for everybody. So talk about maybe the genre a little bit and educate us on the movie and why it's good, why it's not so good. Special delivery. Okay. Read it out loud. Make sure it sounds good. That's the other thing about reading it out loud. You don't really want to put tongue twisters into it, but nice poetic alliteration or other things like that to make it sound good is something to keep an ear out for. And then, of course, the best advice I can ever give anyone, and this should be not just in your deep discussion boards, but in your life. Be creative, be inspiring, and have fun with it. Once you've posted it, read through some others and make some responses. Be nice, be awesome, etc., etc. A good thing to do would be to look up some reviews. This is rogerebert.com, and I haven't read any of these, but here's one called Let Him Go, and these aren't necessarily going to be held to 90 seconds. I chose 90 seconds because it seems like when I watch TV critics, the actual part where they're talking seems about 90 seconds, not including when they show clips or something like that. Okay. So this is going on. Well, that might be 90 seconds. Let's try it. I haven't read this yet, so please bear with me. I have no idea what I'm about to read, and that's not a good idea when you're teaching a class. So anyway, here we go. Flying by the seat of our pants here. The water is too hot in the kitchen sink. A black horse quietly returns to the ranch riderless. A scoop of ice cream falls from a little boy's cone onto the sidewalk. Subtle moments, all, but they do so much to set the scene and establish the themes of regret and redemption in Let Him Go. This is a kind of solid grown-up drama we don't see very often anymore. In a word of superhero blockbusters, this is a low-key throwback of a Western, is the stuff of timeless cinema, but it may as well be a unicorn. Understated in its quiet rhythms and vast beauty, it's also fortified with strong performances and eventually punctuated by shocking moments of violence. Director and writer Thomas Bazooka, I think that's how you say that, takes his time getting to that point, though, and adapting Larry Winston's novel of the same name. So here he's educating us about where the story comes from. His work, particularly in the beginning, is reminiscent of Clint Eastwood's style, both in its setting, and its efficiency of its spare storytelling. Bazooka makes clear makes clear who these characters are from the get-go in a clear and simple ways they interact with each other. He also establishes an air of danger for the young child who will find himself at the center of the story's conflict. It's quick but effective in putting us on edge. Kevin Costner and Diane Lane are in top form as George and Margaret Blackledge, a retired sheriff and his horsewoman wife living on a Montana ranch in the early 1960s. So now we're getting set up. Working with cinematographer Guy Godfrey, Bezucha lets us luxuriate in the endless blue skies dotted with fluffy white clouds. Lane and Costner share a strong, seamless connection as a long-married Midwestern couple, especially having played Ma and Pa Kent in the DC universe. Speaking of blockbusters, the comfort of their mundane daily interactions provides the foundation for the way they ultimately fight for each other when the time comes. At the film start, Blackledge's share their modest home with their son, James, played by Ryan Bruce, his wife, Lorna, Kylie Carter, so in private life, so great in private life, which is I'm not familiar. Anyway, and their infant son, Jimmy. But when James dies in a horseback riding accident, their insular, peaceful world is understandably shattered. A few years later, Lorna remarries Donnie Weeboy, played by William Brattain. But it's obvious from their dour civil ceremony and the way she offers her cheek when he tries to kiss her lips that this is a union of necessity. A chance encounter in the town soon afterward, when Margaret witnesses Donnie's casual cruelty, makes it clear that her grandson is in danger. The way Bazucha stages this scene suddenly, wordlessly, from afar through this windshield of her wood-paneled station wagon gives the moment a startling power. The horror that flickers across Margaret's face is palpable. What do you think of that?
So something in that style.
Yeah, and my recommendation is to look at several different reviews. You can go on Rotten Tomatoes, you can go on Roger Ebert, you can just look up film critiques and maybe find a writer that fits your style. I don't write the way this gentleman or lady writes, and I would probably find someone else to try to emulate, but read some different styles and see how they do it. Some might set the movie up right away and then talk about stuff. This writer chose to talk about other things and then set up the plot. Do include comments about performances and storyline, and do a little check on the director and what they've directed before. If it's something you're familiar with, I don't know that any of us have seen this movie. It says at the top they couldn't find it streaming anywhere, so we haven't seen it. But that's kind of what we're looking at, what you can do. You may already know some critics that you're comfortable with and may see how they do it. This is written for reading, although you would only have to change a few words here and there to make it more audio friendly or TV friendly, as I say. Like when they just put a parenthetical around the actor's name who plays the character, whereas we would write played by or starring, that type of thing to explain that cue that it's not, when you hear it read out loud, it's not there. But it's a good chance for you to test your skills at this. Wouldn't it be nice to make a living watching movies? I call it easy money. Roger Ebert was a huge film critic. I forget, he passed away more than 10 years ago, I think. But he was also early in his life kind of a failed movie maker, filmmaker, which is not a, it's very, very hard to be a successful filmmaker. So that's not a put down in any way. But he went on to be a critic. And he worked for, he and Gene Siskel worked for the competing newspapers in Chicago. I can't remember which one worked for which newspaper, the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune. And then they made a show for PBS called Sneak Previews. And then they went to the network so they could make more money at the movies. And they worked together for many, many years. And one of the things was that they often disagreed. And so having them argue over a movie's merits was the catch, was the hook of the show. But his website has gone on with these reviewers, critics, to help us continue the Roger Ebert name. We were talking about over analyzing movies before. Another problem, I think, with critics is they're paid to watch movies. They watch a lot of movies. And when you watch 100 movies in a month and 10 of them are great, the other 90 are probably going to start to suck in comparison, even though they may not be that bad, but you get very jaded. I was a child when Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert did their work, and I didn't agree with anything that they, and matter of fact, I'm pretty sure they both panned Star Wars, which I think most critics did, but they were adults watching Star Wars. And the first one is, I think, much better for a person. I was 7, it was perfect for me. And my brothers weren't much older and they loved it too. So one of the things I do want to point out is that critics can tend to be a little over harsh because they're really looking for perfection. They also can be of a very different target audience demographic than you. And that's why when I talk about those 4 things critics should do, I'm trying to minimize how jaded someone can be when they're a film critic. I'm also trying to minimize, this is what I think and my word rules. I'm the only opinion that matters, when other opinions are just as valid and could be completely the opposite. So keeping those factors in mind, do your critique and enjoy it. Anybody have any questions or critics that they always go to? Where do you guys go to get information or if you want to see something or not?
I think I just Google it, and Rotten Tomatoes is usually the first one that comes up.
Yeah, you find Rotten Tomatoes works well for you?
No.
No? You do the opposite of what they do?
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, that's the first one that pops up, and so I've just brought that up, but I tend to not agree with them most of the time.
Yeah, and it's funny with streaming because, at least Netflix and others, if you have a 98% match based on what you've watched before, even though I never said I liked it, maybe I watched something and hated it, but those seem to work out really well, I've noticed. Although sometimes it gets confused because we put on so many children's movies. Like, you have a 56% match. It's like, yeah, because I'm watching something adult for the first time. But those things seem to work really well. But like I said, go to Rotten Tomatoes and then say, oh, they hated it, I'm going to watch this. Which is what I did with Siskel and Ebert when I was younger. I said, if they liked it, then I'm probably not going to like it. Because I was the opposite target audience, if there is an opposite.
I guess I think the only time I really ever look up reviews is, to find out the content, if I want my kid to watch it or not. But I'll generally just go to the movie and check it out myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, yeah, I don't want to go into a movie going, I don't know about this.
Yeah. And Joshua likes using IMDb. I like using IMDb too to find out all kinds of things about the movie. And I've always said, ever since somebody told me the twist in the middle of Empire Strikes Back before I saw it, and the one time I snuck and looked at my parents' closet at Christmas gifts before Christmas, if I decide to see a movie, then I don't want to know anything about it. I just want know enough to know whether I want to spend my time or my money watching it. And after that, I want to be surprised by it. So I generally don't read critiques, but I do think it's a valuable tool in this class for you guys to try your hands at it and see how it works. It's not easy. And I'm sure that the one we just read, along with everyone other on this, is not their first draft. So we are reading. But if you do find a place where you agree with them a lot, then that's wonderful, and keep going back to that source. A lot of students know so much about the Marvel universe or other movies, Star Wars universe, and it's wonderful. I love it. For me, I don't have time to look that stuff up, and sometimes I don't want to know that much because I want to be surprised by the movie and try to figure it out in the movie. But it is wonderful after seeing it to have those conversations and learn, oh, that's where that character gets that trait and things like that. There's a lot of great sources out there for us in the thing called the internet. Where else do people go to look?
I mean, I suppose sometimes like a magazine or something like that, like a printed form.
Yeah. Or the newspapers still have it. Let's see. Jeffrey Lyons took over for. Maybe not. I'm trying to find, because they had a couple people took over for Siskel and Ebert, but it doesn't look like the show exists anymore. Okay. Oh, sneak previews they took over. Okay, anyway. The news used the local news, and then back in the old days, Good Morning America had Gene Shalit, which was a movie critic. But I don't watch very much morning news, the Today Show and Good Morning America and all that, but they used to have those segments. I don't know if they still do. IGN also removed movies. Anyway, you can always just go and look up movie reviews. Let's see. There's the RogerEbert.com, Rotten Tomatoes, Twitter. I'm sure you just sign up for Twitter and some NPR. So I can go to NPR and you guys can go to Rotten Tomatoes. Fandango. So check those out. And if you like a review, and look at the person who wrote it and look for more by them if you want. Anyway, enjoy it. It should be a fun assignment. Anybody have any other questions, comments?
And is that due this Sunday? I didn't look at the.
Yeah, that is this week's assignment. Let's see. Oh, yeah, week 12. Okay, so you have your discussion board number 10. This is your final discussion board, your 90-second critique, due on the 22nd. And then your quiz number 9, which will cover last week's message and ideology PowerPoint, as well as this week's critique PowerPoint. And then we're just skating downhill. So yeah, you have a quiz and a discussion board this week. Let me just, okay. I'm gonna stop recording.